Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And a bit of a strange one today because I want to talk a bit about originality in fiction and whether or not it is something that we actually want. Because, quite often we say, oh, this is new, this is a new take on something, oh, it's highly original, oh, or we complain about, oh, this is bland, this is generic. I've seen all this before. And we put a lot of emphasis on originality. And yet, when we think about it, some of our favorite stories are not only ones that we have read before or heard before multiple times, but quite often we gain a lot of satisfaction from reading very, very similar stories. And it's how we're defining originality. And the reason this came up is there was a news story recently about an author, John Hughes, who had written a book called The Dogs. And Hughes was accused of plagiarizing, amongst others, The Great Gatsby, All Quiet on the Western Front, and Anna Karenina. And The Guardian, did an article on this and actually found whole sentences, whole passages that were identical or near identical or incredibly similar to other works. And part of what Hughes said in his defense that The Guardian also published was that not only do all authors take from other authors, there's a long established tradition of this, but it's part and parcel of how we tell stories. And it got me thinking about this, because if we think of something like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, we can say, oh, it was a wholly original work. And yet scholars and fans have pointed out how there are significant aspects of the Lord of the Rings which are drawn from certain myths, that are drawn from certain well-established legends, that are drawn from previous works. But obviously how Tolkien put them together, what Tolkien did with the world, how Tolkien constructed everything, that was original and it was new. And then we can think of those people who were in some way inspired by Tolkien. We talk about texts that are in conversation with Tolkien's work. So for instance, Donaldson's Thomas Covenant books. Stephen R. Donaldson wrote the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, and you can see a lot of Tolkien in Lord Foylesbane, but it isn't trying to copy Tolkien. It is a conversation with Tolkien that is referencing and investigating different things, as Donaldson tried to take what Tolkien did and take it in a very different direction. So tonally, structurally, a lot of those things are different. But there are certain elements within the book that you go, I've read Tolkien, I've read this, and I can see the connection. But it's clear that Donaldson was not copying Tolkien. And then we think of books that were very deliberately written to imitate Tolkien. So for instance, Terry Brooks, the first Shannara book was Sword of Shannara, and Robert Jordan's Eye of the World, both of which owe a huge amount of their story structure, some of the characters, they owe a huge amount to Tolkien. And it's undeniable, really. But this brings into question, how are we defining originality? When we value originality, when we say, oh, I want something to be new, I don't want it to be generic, I don't want it to be repetitive. If you've read Tolkien and then you read, say, Eye of the World, you recognize a lot of the same things. Moraine is very similar to a female Gandalf. Lan is very similar to Aragorn. Not only in terms of his sort of character, but backstory. Rand as hero bears some resemblance to Frodo because, you know, he's sent on a quest unwillingly and suffers for it. We have the whole incident of picking up the knife, a cursed magical object, very similar to a cursed magical ring. The investigation of a dark, scary, abandoned city that has been taken over by evil, very similar to Moria. The splitting up of the fellowship, the different companions. There's so much in it that is very Tolkien-esque. But where we place that dividing line between imitation, inspiration, plagiarism, originality, there aren't clean delineations. Narrative is too complex to really just sort of go, it's this. Because if we go back to that first example I was talking about of John Hughes, the dogs, let's pick a figure at random for the total word count of the novel. Let's say, for instance, it is 100,000 words, because that's a nice round number. If 1,000 of those words were taken from other books, that's only 1%. 1%, so it's 99% John Hughes, 1% other authors. Is that enough for originality? You go, well, the vast majority of it is original. If it was 20,000 words from other authors and only 80,000 from John Hughes, is that still enough to be original? Because, again, vast majority still would be the work of John Hughes. And how those words are incorporated, the structure of them, where they appear, all of those things would be original. And it's taking different authors' works and putting them together. So that is original. No other author has done that. So what is it that we are saying is bad or good about any of these things? When we think of the retelling of various folklore and fairy tale, and in fact, Sir Terry Pratchett has, you know, in the Discworld, taken a lot of well-known, well-established stories and placed his own spin on them and incorporated them into the Discworld. But we never think of those as plagiarized, because clearly Pratchett is doing something new with them, even though they are, you know, well established. So what exactly is it that we complain about in one thing and value in another? One of the reasons why Sword of Shannara and The Eye of the World sold so well and became so beloved was that at the time they contained an essence of familiarity. People were comfortable reading them. They had read The Lord of the Rings and they wanted more of the same but different. And those books, for a lot of people, walked that line, that it was comfortable enough to read, that it wasn't jarring, it wasn't strange, but at the same time still provided something new. And it's a fascinating and very strange aspect of how we process narrative. When we look at a series such as Jim Butcher's The Dresden Files, first of all, there's a lot of material in that is coming from folklore and fairy tale. And Jim Butcher has done his research. He's looked at these things. He's incorporated it into his story world, put his own spin on it. And well, that seems fine. But how is that any different from reading The Great Gatsby and going, oh, I quite like that one passage, I'll use that? And there is a difference. We know there's a difference. We feel that there's a difference, but it's actually quite difficult to articulate, because is it taking an idea of something is fine, but taking the exact wording is wrong? So let's think now about the structure of a number of the Dresden Files, they follow a very familiar pattern. A lot of the early books follow a very similar story pattern. And because of that, you read them, and while the surface level details of each case, each adventure in the Dresden books is unique, it is different, it's focusing on a different thing, the actual pattern and structure is very, very similar each time. So there is an established pattern, which is very familiar, but there's enough change to make it feel new, different, original. And then we can get into a discussion of things like the retellings of Arthurian myth. How many different times are we going to hear the story of Arthur or the legend of Robin Hood? We all know those stories. And yet Hollywood and other authors keep retelling them. They tell them in slightly different ways, but the story is usually highly identifiable as similar to the original. So the story is the same, or is it? Is it different? When we look at these retellings, when we look at the different spin that is put on a classic story, we are very rarely shocked by what happens in them. We have certain expectations. We have a familiarity with what happens in them, but how they are being told is different. The emphasis found in each narrative is different. And the legends of Robin Hood and the myths of King Arthur, they're from very far back in time. So there's no infringement on copyright. There's no intellectual property being stolen. These are stories and myths and legends that, are in the public domain and everyone's aware of. But what happens when we take something much closer to today's time period? And I was struck recently by episode 9 of season 1 of Strange New Worlds, which is called All Those Who Wander, and the Orville season 3, episode 2, Shadow Realms. Now, this is going to have spoilers for both of those, because both of those stories are remarkably similar. And not only that, not only are they remarkably similar to each other, the reason they are remarkably similar to each other is they are remarkably similar to another well-known, well-established, famous science fictional work, which is the film Alien. In extraordinary degrees. So if we take the Orville Shadow Realms episode, in that, the Orville is exploring a new bit of space, and they hear a distress call. They go to where this call is coming from, and it's a strange, weird, abandoned space station from an alien race that they know nothing about. They go in. There are these strange things mounted on the wall. Someone looks at one of them, gets sprayed in the face with stuff. And it turns out they are then changed into an alien. The alien then runs around the Orville. There's lots of dark corridors and scuttling around the roof, and it's very much horror influenced, changing other people into aliens and killing them. And you go, wow, that sounds remarkably like the film Alien. There's a distress call from a crashed spaceship. They go down. It's a strange planet. There's an alien spaceship from a race they never knew about. There's a bunch of eggs. One of them looks at an egg and gets a thing attached to his face. It then has an alien that bursts out of him, and it runs around killing the crew, trying to propagate. And the key character at the center of the Orville episode is the Doctor, a female character. The key character at the center of Alien is obviously Ripley, female character. There are a lot of things about not only the story beats, the direction of the story, the characterization, the structure of everything. They are remarkably similar. So is this a ripoff of Alien? But in the episode of the Orville, first of all, it is placed very firmly inside the story world of the Orville. It fits with the narrative world that has been created. This new bit of space that they're exploring, they've been warned about these demons. They investigate. The doctor character is not Ripley. It isn't a face hugger attaching to someone's face. It is someone who's slowly turned into an alien. And it is resolved not by killing the alien, but by a plea for the alien to leave. And so there are very, very significant differences. It isn't just doing Alien again. It's doing the Alien story, but in a way that fits with the narrative universe, the story world of the Orville. So are they plagiarizing Alien? Are they inspired by Alien? Are they imitating Alien? Is it original enough? Is it a new story, or is it simply copying someone else's story? And it's very difficult to draw that line. What is the difference between inspiration and copying? What is the difference between your own spin on something? How different does that have to be from the original before we say, yes, now it's an original work? And how different does it have to be where we say, that's not different enough? And we have a very similar thing that happened in Strange New Worlds, episode 9, All Those Who Wander. In that episode, there's a distress call on a desolate planet. They go down, there's a crashed spaceship, and there's a couple of survivors, one of whom is infested with these eggs, these parasites, which then hatch out of the body in a way that is very, very similar to the little alien chest bursting out of the character, was it Kane, in Alien. And one of the people rescued is a little girl, which is Aliens, the second one, not the first one. And at the center of all of this is La'an, a female character who's already had to deal with this and dealing with her fear of these aliens. And during that episode, we have the same thing of these things burst out, they kill people, they get bigger and become more dangerous. We have the same shots of the corridor, the same turning the camera into a crazy angle to reflect the alien's perspective and hunting them. You can see all of those elements of Alien once again. And in this episode, instead of shooting the alien out into space to kill it as they did in Aliens, and instead of blowing the spaceship up as how they got rid of the alien in Alien, they freeze the alien, which is something that was in Alien Resurrection, with the torturing the aliens with the cold blast of liquid oxygen or something. And also the character of Hammer, knowing he is infected with these parasites, steps off and falls backward to his own death, just like Ripley does in Alien 3. Beat for beat, very, very similar. Even the hiding in the sort of the cargo pod things is very similar to how Ripley ends up at the end of Alien. That, again, so much of this episode is clearly and readily identifiable as Alien, part of Aliens, maybe Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection, but it is drawing direct elements from those things, but it is placed in the Star Trek universe. The alien isn't strange. It's an aspect of the Gorn, something that's tied into earlier episodes, something that's tied into Land's story arc, something that's part and parcel of the Star Trek universe. So all of those things are original, are new, and they make the story fit with Star Trek. So again, where do we draw the line? Do we say this is just a rip-off of Alien, or is it something that is different enough to be considered its own thing? And at the end of the day, does it matter? If you enjoy the episode, does it really matter that we've seen the story before? Because we've heard the story of Little Red Riding Hood, I don't know how many times, or Cinderella, or any of these folklore and fairy tales. And yet every once in a while, there will be a new film or TV show that comes out and it will do a Cinderella story. It will do a rags to riches story. It will do a Sleeping Beauty story. It will do a Little Red Riding Hood story. We like the familiarity and the repetition. And it's a fascinating aspect for so many of us. We claim we love originality, and yet quite often some of the things that we love the most are actually highly derivative. And so this leads to this very odd construction and almost cognitive dissonance. I like originality. Oh, the Star Trek Strange New Worlds episode, it was original enough. The Orville episode was original enough. And yet it is very easy to point to narrative elements, narrative events, the concepts being used, the structure being used, all of those things being derived from a previous work. So the question that we're kind of left with is, do we really like originality? And there's a weird add-on to this discussion. A lot of discussion online focuses on, I don't want any spoilers. Spoilers, oh, this is terrible. And of course, spoilers came from the concept of spoiling the ending. That the ending, the twist ending of something, the mystery ending of something was revealed and therefore spoiled or ruined the end because it was meant to be a mystery. The research into this has shown that actually, if we know what the end is, we enjoy it even more. And not only that, there's a difference between a mystery in a show that is intended for the characters and a mystery in the show that is intended for the viewer. So for instance, Columbo, the TV show, the viewer knew how the murder was committed at the start and who the murderer was. The hook for the show was Columbo, the detective, didn't, and the viewer followed Columbo as Columbo worked it out and worked out what the motive was or an intricacy about how they managed to commit the murder. But a lot of that information was available to the viewer long before it was available to Columbo. We knew from the start. And so we kind of knew the ending from the very beginning of the episode. And that seems absolutely contrary to how we think about what mystery is meant to be. In the Wheel of Time TV show, there's a lot of talk about how, oh, it was set up to have who is the dragon as this mystery that the viewers were trying to solve. But another way of looking at it is Moraine, the character, doesn't know who the dragon is and she's trying to solve it. The viewer is given a lot more information than Moraine is. And there's a comfort in the viewer working it out long before Moraine does. And the viewer can then feel very self-satisfied that, oh, they're smarter than the character. It's a very well-established, well-known, and very effective technique. Spoilers don't always ruin things. And when we extend that to, oh, well, knowing that a certain character is in something, knowing that it's going to be set in a different place. Like, how are we defining spoilers now? Is it any information whatsoever about the text? Spoilers have become a very broad concept. And yet all of the evidence suggests that we actually like things being spoiled. We like familiarity. We enjoy the familiarity. We enjoy knowing before the characters do. It adds to the experience of reading and processing narrative. But I just thought this was an interesting topic to discuss because originality, spoilers, familiarity with story form and structure, which sometimes is less obvious. Something like the MCU movies follow very similar structures. There's a familiarity in the structure of the films. So even though the events depicted may be different, we know what the rise and fall of action is going to be. We know where action sequences are going to occur. We understand that while we might not know the nuances of what's going to happen, the general thrust of where the story is going is very obvious. We have lots of people talk about how when they read the first couple of chapters of a book, if they don't know where the book is going, they go, well, I feel confused. Things haven't been explained to me. That's the first couple of chapters of a book. But we now have this expectation that yes, we want to know where the book is going. We want to know what the book is generally about. We look at trailers now for films, and it's a bugbear of mine, but a lot of modern day trailers show you so much of whatever the story is that you can guess 90% of what is going to happen in the film just from the trailer. And even then, applying a tiny bit of logic to it, you can fill in some more as well. But even knowing that, knowing the type of film it is, I don't think anyone going into Top Gun Maverick was surprised by the ending. Like, we knew where that film was going to go because we know the type of film it is. So, familiarity, repetition, originality. These are all intricately interwoven into our pleasure and entertainment factors. And we all have different thresholds, but we will have comfort reads. We will have stories that we return to, things that, oh yeah, I've already seen that before, but it was a very funny episode. I'll watch it again. So even though I know all the jokes, I'll watch that TV show again. Even though I know what the ending of this film is, I'll watch the film again because I enjoy the process of it. And I think a lot of online discussion quite frequently over focuses on the ending as a surprise, or the ending as, yes, it does this thing, and under focuses on the actual experience of the narrative. We over privilege in our discussions originality, when a lot of times we like repetition and reiteration. So thank you very much for watching. I'd be interested to know what you think on this. But see you in the next one.